Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Ms. Wilmot, you may continue with redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Laviolette.
Good morning, Ms. Wilmot.
Yesterday we left off talking about sexual humiliation. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And I'm showing you exhibit number 558. Oh, I'll need Judge. Thank you. Okay. And the prosecutor was asking you questions about trying to fit Mr. Alexander as a victim with sexual humiliation and degradation, right?
Correct.
And do you remember him talking to you about one single comment that was located in a long tirade instant message from May 26th of 2008, where he refers to himself as a dildo with a heartbeat, right?
Yes, I do.
And this was, that tirade was May 26th, right?
Correct.
But it would have been just 16 days earlier that he participated in phone sex with Miss Arias, right?
Correct.
And you listened to that.
Yes, I did.
And on that tape, on that particular recording, didn't he talk about the plan of coming up to visit Miss Arias in Wairika?
Yes, he did.
And talking about acting on sexual fantasies that he had with her?
Yes, he did.
And do you remember reviewing a 10-page text message from May 2nd, 2008 from Mr. Alexander to Miss Arias?
I do.
And this is Exhibit 391. And in this particular text message, it goes on for 10 pages, but isn't it talking about his fantasy that he has about coming to do a photo shoot with her, right?
Correct.
And it goes on, starting to talk about how dirty they're going to get and so forth, right?
Correct.
And by the end of the text message, he's really graphic about what he wants to do to Miss Arias, right?
Correct.
Given all this information about his behavior and the things that he actually said and the things that he did and what he wanted to do with Miss Arias, does that in any way place him as a victim of sexual humiliation?
No, it does not.
Do you remember you were asked questions about having an interview with the prosecutor, right?
Correct.
And the interview took place about 5 months before you testified.
Correct.
Or began testifying, right?
Right.
When you did that interview with the prosecutor, that was in my office, wasn't it?
Yeah. Overall.
Was that in my office?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And when do you live here in Arizona?
No, I don't.
Okay. So when you came out for that interview, did you bring all the boxes of evidence that you have with you?
No, I didn't.
Do you remember being asked the question about whether or not Miss Arias shot Mr. Alexander in the closet?
Objection misstates the question that was asked.
Approach, please.
Sustained.
Yesterday, Ms. Violet, do you remember having a conversation or being questioned by the prosecutor about where Miss Arias shot Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Did you have a chance to review your notes?
Yes, I did.
And in reviewing your notes, does it state anywhere in there that Miss Arias told you that she shot him in the closet?
No.
So that's not something Miss Arias told you?
No, it isn't.
The nuances and the specific facts about where, by the time we get to June 4th, and where the gunshot happens or what happens first, what happens last, Was that a big determining factor for you when you are making your assessment about the relationship being domestically violent?
No, actually, I mean, what I looked at were the emails, the IMs, the various written materials that I had to really look at whether domestic violence occurred, not what happened the day of the murder, not what happened in particular. What I was focused on was looking at the issues of domestic violence in the context of domestic violence.
Okay, and during your interview with the prosecutor back in November, was he asking you specific questions about what happened on June 4th?
Yes.
All right, and so based on the review of your notes, did you make a mistake when you told him that if you said anything about the shooting happening in a closet?
Overruled. Yes, I made a mistake about that.
I want to talk to you about the questions that the prosecutor asked you about when Miss Arias went to speak to Bianca, a girl that Mr. McCartney started seeing. Okay?
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Do you remember being questioned about that, about whether or not Miss Arias was still dating Mr. McCartney at the time that she went to go see Bianca?
Yes, I remember that.
And did you, as part of your assessment, did you review an interview or things that Mr. McCartney had to say?
Yes, I did.
And in reviewing what Mr. McCartney had to say, what is it that he had to say with regard to when Miss Arias went to speak to Bianca? Were they still dating?
Overruled. Mr. McCartney and Miss Arias were actually still dating, and when she went up to talk to Bianca.
Okay, so they had not broken up yet.
No.
And so Mr. McCartney admitted that he was cheating on Miss Arias, is that right?
Correct.
With regard to that particular conversation with Bianca, between Miss Arias and this woman, Bianca, what about that conversation would have been important for you?
That Miss Arias was direct about it, that by Miss Arias's account and by Mr. McCartney's account, that it was not a hostile, angry kind of confrontation, but it was merely a talk that they had and that they continued to talk for a period of time. And that was the end of it, that Miss Arias did not follow up by any evidence that I've seen. She did not harass this woman. She did not, because I would look at that. I would look at, did she continue to call or make calls to this woman? Did she, that sort of thing. And none of that happened by any evidence that I have reviewed.
Okay. Do you remember being asked questions by the prosecutor about whether or not Miss Arias said something about cutting her fingers when she was cutting apples?
Yes.
Based on your review of all of the information you have, is it your understanding that this information was originally told to one person, right?
Yes.
Overruled.
And then did that one person tell a second person?
Yes.
And did that second person then be interviewed about supposedly what Miss Arias said?
Yes.
In any event, did that statement about cutting her fingers when she was cutting apples, did this statement occur after June 4th and before she had been arrested?
Yes.
And is this statement something that was allegedly made, when she was still lying about what happened on June 4th?
Yes. Yes, it was.
And long before she told the truth about what happened?
Yes.
You were asked questions.
Of what happened.
Sustained.
Was this statement made long before Miss Arias told you what she believes to be the truth?
Yes.
You were asked questions about a knife being on the nightstand. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Is it your understanding that Miss Arias is not clear about where the knife was?
Yes, I just wrote in my notes some of the things that were said. There was not clarity about it. Knife on nightstand, I think I wrote in my notes.
Okay. And at later times, did she talk to you about not remembering exactly where things were because after the attack?
Yes, she couldn't remember much after the attack at all.
You had questions about jealousy, right?
Yes,
And questions about whether or not Miss Arias exhibited any jealousy.
correct.
In April of 2008, was Miss Arias texting with another man named Ryan Burns?
Yes, she was.
And was she starting the beginning of a potential relationship with him?
Yes, she was.
Was she talking about going to see him?
Yes, she was.
And in fact, when she went to Utah, is that who she was going to see?
Yes.
The fact that she, in April of 2008, is talking to Ryan Burns, and I think is she also at that point registered on a website to meet new people?
Yes, she's registered on LDS LinkUp.
Okay. Does that speak to her ability to start to this continual slow separation she was making?
Yes, I mean, she was pursuing a couple of people she'd met on LDS LinkUp and beginning to pull away in a more definitive way by looking to meet other men.
And based on your experience and training and education, how do many abusive partners react when the other partner is attempting to separate?
Well, they get fearful when the other person, if they're not wanting it, they get fearful if the other person starts to leave. And in fact, there's research that talks about the most dangerous time for a battered woman being the time that she separates from the partner.
Do you remember getting a hypothetical question about Mr. Alexander telling Mr. Freeman that he wanted Miss Arias to move away?
Yes.
In your review, have you reviewed journal entries from Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I have.
And did some of those entries were written in May of 2008?
Yes, they were.
And in May of 2008, did he talk in his own journals about Jodi moving away?
Yes, he did.
And how did he talk about it?
He talked about Jodi moving away as being good for both of them. That they both needed discipline, and it would be good for him and for her if she moved.
Is there anything in his journals about him fearing her?
No, there isn't anything in his journals about him fearing her.
Let me get this question exact. Because you were asked questions about whether or not you had any other indications, I believe, other than Miss Arias's word, that she caught Mr. Alexander masturbating to a picture of a little boy. Do you remember that question?
Yes, I do.
And you started to answer what other indications you saw that would support what Miss Arias said about catching Mr. Alexander, right?
Correct.
Are you aware that Mr. Alexander sent her boys' underwear?
Yes.
And that just doesn't come from Miss Arias's word, but did you also see text messages that indicate she was wearing boys' underwear for Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Did you get information or have information that Miss Arias was clean shaven or completely waxed so that she had no hair?
Yes.
In her pubic area?
Yes.
And that was something that Mr. Alexander liked?
Yes.
And did you get information that Mr. Alexander liked Jodi to wear pigtails?
Yes.
And in fact, on June 4th, do we have a picture of her, of course nude, but from the top up, does she have pigtails?
Yes, she does.
And did you get information that Mr. Alexander liked her to dress as a schoolgirl?
Yes.
And besides all of that, did you also, in listening to this phone sex tape, did you also hear his own voice?
Yes, I did.
And did you hear his own voice when after Miss Arias allegedly had an orgasm, he tells her, "It sounds like you're this 12-year-old girl having her first orgasm."
Yes.
And did you hear him say, "It's so hot"?
Yes.
And that she had to clarify, what did you say? And he repeated, a 12-year-old girl having her first orgasm.
Correct.
And did you also hear out of Mr. Alexander's own mouth that he said, like corking the pot of a little girl?
Yes.
And this was all recorded, right?
This was recorded, yes.
Based on that information, do you think that information is supportive at all of when the prosecutor asked you if there was any other indications beside Jodi's word that she caught him masturbating to pictures of a little boy?
I thought that was collaborative data that supported that.
Do you remember being asked questions from the prosecutor about Jodi's truthfulness?
Yes.
As part of your assessment, did you review interviews from previous boyfriends?
Yes, I did.
And that would be Mr. McCartney?
Mr. McCartney and Mr. Brewer.
Okay. And how long were she and Mr. McCartney together?
They were together approximately 2 years,
And how long were she and Mr. Brewer together?
approximately 4 years.
And so this 6 years of time that she was with 2 other men was prior to her meeting Mr. Alexander, is that right?
Correct, and they still have relationship. I mean, they've remained friends.
That Jodi's remained friends with both Matt and Daryl?
Yes.
Does Mr. Brewer have a son that he adores?
Yes, he does. Son named Jack.
Okay, and did he have this son when he was in a relationship, with Jodi?
Yes, he did.
To your knowledge, based on the interviews you've read, did Jodi spend a lot of time with his son?
Jodi spent time with his son Jack, yes.
And did Mr. Brewer view that as positive?
Yes, he did.
Those 2 people that were with her in a committed relationship with her for a while, did you ever see them accuse her of being a liar?
No.
Did you ever see them even complain that she was a liar?
No.
Now, there was a lot of talk on cross-examination about how you don't rely on just one statement or incident. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And the prosecutor also asked you a lot about stalking, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And he asked you a lot, or asked you about Mr. Alexander being afraid of Jodi.
Correct.
Okay. The questioning that centers around Mr. Alexander being afraid of Jodi comes from just one statement, doesn't it?
It does.
And that's a statement that came from Mr. Alexander's mouth.
Correct.
And is this the same mouth that lied about his virginity?
Yes.
Lied about his virginity to his church?
Correct.
And did he lie?
Sustained.
In the readings and everything that you've read, are you aware that Mr. Alexander portrayed himself as a virgin?
Yes.
Someone who's never had sex at all.
Yes.
And he was, based on your information, was he a priesthood holder in his church?
Yes.
And in order to be a priesthood holder in the Mormon church, do you have to follow their laws?
Sustained.
Are you aware of whether or not somebody has to follow the laws with regard to the church in order to be a priesthood member?
I don't know all the laws of the Mormon Church, but my understanding is that
Hearsay, speculation. Foundation.
Approach, please.
Ms. Laviolette, did you speak with that? Did Miss Arias ever give you any information about what it would, some of what it would take to be a priesthood holder in the Mormon Church?
Yes,
And did you talk about whether or not a person would have to follow the laws of chastity in order to stay or remain a priesthood holder?
yes,
And so is that where your understanding comes from?
yes,
So, based on that understanding, if somebody was not following, if Mr. Alexander was not following the laws of chastity because he's having sex, any type of sexual contact, but yet was still a priesthood holder in the Mormon Church, is there a falsehood? Is there a deception going on?
yes,
The Foundation is whether or not he was a priesthood holder.
It's prior testimony.
Overruled. You may answer.
Is there deception there?
yes,
And is that same deception something that went on with his own friends, believing that he was a virgin?
yes,
And did that same deception go on with his own family, believing that he was a virgin?
as far as I know.
And is this similar? Did you find deception when you look at the relationship between Miss Andrews and Mr. Alexander?
Yes,
And did he have the same type of deception when he told Miss Alexander that he wasn't dating Jodi?
yep,
When he told Miss Andrews that he wasn't dating Jodi?
yes,
And when he took Jodi to have a soup pie at the same time he was dating Miss Andrews?
correct,
Is that deceptive?
yes. She says she didn't know.
Objection here.
Was Miss Andrews aware of whether or not he took Jodi to have a soup pie before he took her to have a soup pie?
Objection, Foundation. How?
Sustained.
Based on an email that you read? Did she know this?
Objection meeting.
Overruled.
Yes, Miss Andrews said that she did not know.
Overruled.
Miss Andrews did not know that Miss Arias was going on that trip, although she suspected, I believe,
Okay.
something.
All right. And this is going into the later part of the year in 2007. Is that right?
Correct.
And so during this time, is Mr. Alexander leading a life different from a public life, different from his private life?
Yes, he is. He's leading a double life.
What does it do to a person when they lead a double life?
Objection, Foundation.
Sustained.
In your practice in meeting with the different women and different men, and dealing with abusive men that you've dealt with, do most abusive men act out in the workplace or in other family situations, not their intimate partner, but other outside family situations? Do you see that they are acting, having this abusive nature to them when they're with friends and other people other than their intimate partner?
No, in fact, most of the research will show that most people who are abusive in intimate family situations aren't abusive at work, most, and aren't abusive in general, that it's a secret for lots of them, and it's something that nobody else would be aware of and that nobody else would have any idea. In fact, they might have a hard time believing that this person was, because they can be very good people in many areas of their lives, and are very good people in many areas of their lives.
And so does it take a lot of energy sometimes then for these people to have this double type of life?
Objection, recommendation.
Approach, please.
We were just talking about your practice and dealing with, in your groups that you have with battered men, or men who batter, right?
Correct.
Okay. And we were just talking about how some of these men who batter find it maybe abusive with their intimate partners, but may lead a totally different life outside that.
Correct.
Okay. In your experience with these people, do you get an idea or an understanding from them if whether or not this is difficult for them to carry on with this? Does this take a lot of energy for them?
Objection, recommendation is to the number.
Sustained.
What number? Maybe approach? I don't know.
Yes.
So Violette, in the 34 years that you've been practicing, do you have any idea of numbers of how many men you've dealt with, the men who batter that you've dealt with that have had this situation where they may be abusive at home but not at work? And maybe not just, and let me add to that, maybe not just the men that you've specifically dealt with, but some of the women that have talked to you about it, and some of the women that have talked to you about how their husband is somebody who's maybe in the politics or something in a high, well-respected area.
Objection, recommendation is to the women, how they would know.
The women.
All right. Overruled. Let me answer the question.
I would say well over well over half, probably 2/3, where other people are not aware of what's going on. A double life is something a little different than that. I mean, that's one area, but carrying on a double life takes more energy than that.
Okay. All right. So well over 2/3, you said?
I said anywhere from a half to 2/3. I suspect about 2/3, but I've never kept track.
Right. Okay. So in dealing with these type of men, is it difficult for them to have this double life? Is it difficult for them to maintain? Does it take a lot of energy for them to do?
It takes a lot of energy to do a double life. And there's one thing about, having people not know about the fact that you may be abusive in your intimate relationship. It's another thing to have a spiritual dimension added to that, where you are, seen and your whole life is seen as sort of a moral pillar. And I believe that is an incredible struggle when I've worked with people of faith, and they have a belief about who they are, and that's the part of themselves that they care about. That's the part of themselves that they really value. And when you're going against your moral core, it is incredibly difficult for anybody when you live a life of deception. It's one thing to have people not know that you can be abusive. It's another thing to have people not only not know that you're not abusive, but not know that you're living a life that's antithetical to everything you stand for. So, for instance, there would be so much for Mr. Alexander to lose. And I've never, ever believed Mr. Alexander was a sociopath. I believe that Mr. Alexander cares. I believe Mr. Alexander...
Actually, you have to go with the question.
Sustained.
Based on what you know about Mr. Alexander's life and who he portrayed himself to be, did he have a lot to lose if the truth were to come out?
He has a significant amount to lose. He has his standing with his profession, which is, he has so many people. In fact, his two...
Or no?
Sustained.
How does he have a lot to lose?
His two closest friends are, one of them heads his PPL division, and that's where he earns his money. And he is well thought of there. He's a motivational speaker there. If his private life came out, I think it would destroy a lot of that. If he would lose his priesthood standing. And I think one of the hardest things is losing what you believe is the core or essence of who you are, which is, I'm a decent human being because I do these things and because I adhere to these tenets, but yet you're not adhering to those tenets at all. And I think that's incredibly self-destructive and takes a huge toll on a human being.
What happens when somebody has fear about these private things coming out about them?
Well, in cases of domestic violence, fear often leads to anger and rage. And anger and rage is normally directed at the people that you feel the safest with, the people that you feel are not going to tell, the people that are the safest, in effect, safest targets. And in this case, Ms. Arias is the safest target.
And is Miss Arias the only one who knew about this secret life?
Objection, lack of foundation.
Sustained.
Did Miss Arias know about his secret life?
Yes, she did.
And so let's compare that then with some of the questions you were asked about Miss Arias's truthfulness, okay?
All right.
With regard to her truthfulness, the lies or the lack of truthfulness, the lies that she told, when did those start happening?
After Mr. Alexander was killed.
And given the fact that she lies about killing Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes.
And did she lie about whether or not she was even there?
Yes, she did.
And then did she change her story and have another lie about two people, two intruders that supposedly killed Mr. Alexander?
Yes, she did.
Given all of these lies that she told after June 4th of 2008, do they define her for you? Do they cause you problems in her believability?
No, they don't.
Why is that?
Because if Miss Arias was a really good liar, she would have planned a really good lie, and she didn't.
All right, nothing further.
Foundation of a really good lie.
Call the roll. The answer will stand. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take an early noon recess. I'm going to ask that you return at 1:15. 1:15 today. Please remember the admonition. You are excused. Counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Ms. Laviolette, the jurors have some questions for you.
All right.
I'm going to ask them in the order they were submitted by the jury. You stated that you read journal entries done during the time Jodi was with Travis. Did you read entries from any earlier time frames?
No, I didn't. I read very limited information prior to the journals I read during the time frame they were together. So that would be from 2006 through 2008.
If you had read entries from the earlier time frame, do you feel it may have given you a better picture of Jodi?
I read a lot of information from her family and her prior boyfriends. So I read things other than her journal prior to that. So I felt like I had a pretty good picture of Jodi as viewed by other people.
Did you read or view any interviews involving Travis's friends and family?
I saw the 7 hours of unedited footage from 48 Hours Mystery. But other than that, I think I read one email from his sister directed to him. But no, I didn't, other than that.
What did you learn about Travis?
What did I learn about Travis? I learned from reading his what he wrote in his book and some of his blog that he was a motivational speaker, that he was quite good at it, that he was a man who knew his scriptures, that he was a man who came from an incredibly abusive background in childhood, that his survival as a child was tough, that he was, according to him, made fun of because he was unable to bathe sometimes, that he and his siblings were subjected to verbal, emotional, physical abuse and neglect. I learned that he was attractive to women and that he was able to, appeal to numbers of women. I don't know much about his friendships because I didn't really hear him talk about his friendships. I know that he had friendships with the Hughes, both the Hughes, and that was a 5-year friendship, and that during that time they were concerned about the way he treated women. And I learned about his anger from his own words and also from the way he talked to Miss Arias, to Jodi. I learned something about the way he talked to women in general in private. So I'm not sure if that fully answers it or not.
Do you think that Jodi could have lied to you to help her case?
You know, when I first met Jodi, she was very protective of Mr. Alexander, and
Objection, not response.
Overruled. You may continue.
she had a very hard time looking at herself as a battered woman, saw herself as, you know, it takes two to tango kind of thing. And so I was, you know, I've been involved in other cases where people sort of try to convince me about who they are and what's happened to them, and I never found that to be true with Jodi. And then in reading from men who had lived with her and spent a great deal of time with her, she was never described in any way as lying. I know that, you know, she lied in high school, but I don't actually, or kept things from her parents, I should say. I don't know that she lied directly, but kept things from her parents, and I find that very typical of teenagers. So I didn't find that unusual. And frankly, I don't find it unusual for people to lie when they do things that are abhorrent in their own lives. The Archbishop of New York was just caught lying, and the Lance Armstrong lied over many years, and Bill Clinton lied. And people lie when they are afraid, and they are afraid of the repercussions to their own lives, to their careers, to their image. And probably a lot of us have lied about something far less serious than killing someone. So,
All right, Ms. Laviolette, could Jodi have exaggerated to help her case?
she could have exaggerated. I actually did not find that she was a person who did exaggerate. She tended to minimize more than exaggerate, and it took a while before I got information from her, even about the incidents. She would tend to describe them as less than and as, you know, not happening all the time. So I found that more to be true with Jodi.
Is it possible friends and family may have embellished in an effort to help her?
I guess, except that friends and family didn't seem to go overboard. And a lot of what I read were Mr. Alexander's words directed at her, the way he talked to her, the kind of disrespect that was there, the kind of, you know, when I looked at the escalation process, I didn't find that what her friends and family said, you know, it seemed pretty even-handed. I mean, they didn't just say, gee, she's this wonderful person. They made statements about her in other ways as well. So it wasn't just trying to paint her with a white brush.
What did you discover about Travis when looking at emails, texts, and instant messages to other women?
Mr. Alexander tended to push sexual limits. He would start to talk to somebody, and he would start making sexual kind of innuendos to people and see where that would go. And then when it opened the door, he also, with some women, was trying to push PPL on them. If they joined PPL, he got credits in that direction. I learned that he was very good with women. He sort of read them and read the women he was with, but he also irritated women. And what I mean by that is there were some women he pushed fast on, faster than they wanted. He would back off. So he had a sense about, for a lot of these women, I think, about playing them, how to play them. And I think he did that pretty effectively. And I think oftentimes, or with some of the women, shared his faith, because he was so well versed, or apparently so well versed in his faith and the scriptures and whatever, he was able to sort of insinuate his way into their confidence with that also, and he was able to, on paper, empathize with them. One of the women was someone who said that her husband was, not somebody who let her have friends or let her be around other men, and he would tell her to go to the bishop and that wasn't right, and he shouldn't treat her that way. And there was another woman who said that she was with her ex-husband was emotionally and verbally abusive to her and addicted to pornography, and he was empathetic and would be empathetic with those women. So there was a real dynamic about, getting, sort of insinuating himself into those relationships. Now, I only have emails in particular and written information from about somewhere around December of '07 to June of '08. So I don't have a lot of information prior to that.
Is it common for women in abusive relationships to snap and commit violent acts against long-standing perpetrators?
Actually, usually what we find is that women, when they snap in a lethal way, that it's been a self-defense kind of situation.
Order.
Sustained.
And I ask that her comment be stricken.
Yes, the comment is stricken. You may approach. With regard to the last question, can you answer that question yes or no without elaborating? And again, that question is whether it is common for women in abusive relationships to snap and commit violent acts against long-standing perpetrators.
It's not easy to answer in a yes or no, Your Honor.
We have heard multiple times from the defense the terms survivor and victim used together. Is it possible for the survivor to be the perpetrator?
Is that a yes or no?
It is a yes or no. Do you need to elaborate?
Yes.
You may.
It's very possible for somebody to lash back. In fact, there's a term for it Michael Johnson uses. It's called violent resistance. So that when someone has been a victim of domestic violence, they sometimes hit back. And that would be more the usual form that I would see, that there might be somebody yelling back, there might be somebody hitting back, there might be somebody, doing something on that order. Most of the time what I see in terms of violent resistance might be an explosion that would be more like hitting or yelling, that sort of thing. Screaming at somebody. So in that way, it could be physical and it could be violent because that person could hit that other person back. I have rarely, in my experience, I haven't seen it with much with a weapon.
We have seen and heard that Jodi has kicked her mother, slapped her mother, has been angry with her mother, and even called her sister stupid. Would this characterize Jodi as an abuser?
I believe that happened when Jodi was a teenager, and what I would characterize that as a very angry teenager. I certainly wouldn't characterize that, and calling your sister stupid, that's not uncommon. Kicking your mother, hitting your mother, I don't approve of that. I don't think that's a great thing to do. I think teenagers do a lot of things that, unfortunately, I don't think are great things to do. And I know she has anger with her mother, and I know that's been part of their history. But I haven't seen her, at least as an adult, I haven't seen any evidence that there's been physical violence with her mother.
Why would a perpetrator be abusive in one relationship but not another?
Partially because it depends on the level of intimacy that somebody has. What I've seen, and specifically with Mr. Alexander, is that most of his relationships weren't long-term. And so it usually takes a period of time before you see physical violence and real emotional violence happen. There's a progression with that. And so you wouldn't see that happening right away. And even in what you would call not a long-term relationship, for instance, with Lisa Andrews, which was more intimate, I think next to Miss Arias, the relationship with Miss Andrews was the most intimate. And she talks about feeling disrespected in that relationship, which was fairly short, and they broke up 3 times. The other relationships, and there were some where women said that they didn't like how he talked or whatever, even in those relationships, they were for the most part, via some kind of, the internet or IMs or that sort of thing. It's really not very difficult to be non-aggressive with somebody you're not spending much time with. So where we tend to see that aggression really happen is when people have more time together, they have more that there is to argue about or to have conflict about, and then it's how they handle that conflict after that. So for most of the folks that I've worked with, they may have a relationship that's less aggressive than another one, but the more intimate, and for some of the fellows I talk to, it's the person that they're most connected to that they wind up being the most abusive to.
Have you ever seen situations where victims kill their partners because they see no other way out?
I've worked on one case where that was true. I've worked with lots of battered women, and there have been.
Objection, lack of foundation, one case.
Sustained.
Lack of foundation, one case.
Well, Judge Mayor Person?
You may approach. Is it conceivable that a woman could kill her partner just to get away from the abuse?
Is it conceivable?
Is it conceivable?
I would say that it is conceivable, but rare.
Have you seen relationships in which abuse has escalated on both sides, where the individuals are both victim and perpetrator?
Generally speaking, with domestic violence, that does not stay at that level. And the latest research that's come out in heterosexual relationships says that when men and women are both being violent with each other, that over time the male partner tends to get more violent than the female. But I have seen situations where both people were violent with each other. Yes, I have.
Is it possible that Travis and Jodi were in this type of relationship?
It doesn't appear that way to me because I don't see any evidence of it, even in the verbal confrontations. You don't see Jodi Arias escalating the situation. You see her trying to calm the situation. So I don't have any evidence that that's true. I don't have any evidence that there's been physical intimidation. And the other part is when I look at domestic violence, part of what I look at is the element of fear in that relationship. And so I don't see as much the fear or the behaviors to try to adjust to the other person. Mr. Alexander tends to be the one that is escalating and getting really aggressive. And Miss Arias tends to be the one that's sort of trying to slow the process down. So I don't have evidence of that. And in her prior...
Beyond scope.
Overruled. You may complete your answer.
In her prior two relationships, there's no evidence whatsoever in these long-term relationships that she has been violent or aggressive or jealous. Both partners say that that is not part of her history.
If Jodi slapped and kicked her mother in the past, could she be seen as a perpetrator?
She could definitely be seen as someone who kicked and hit her mother in the past. I would want to know, once again, when I look at perpetrators, I'm looking at power differences, and what I'm talking about in this relationship is the relationship between two peers, between people who are in an intimate relationship.
Sustained. Because of possible consequences, do you feel it is possible that Jodi could be exaggerating abuse events?
I think anything's possible. When I look at the kind of escalation that I've seen with Mr. Alexander, and when I listen to what his friends, the Hughes, have said, it is very difficult for me to believe that.
Could Jodi and Travis, for example, fit somewhere around the high conflict and abuse columns in your matrix, but then by exaggerating events, make it appear that they as a couple lean more toward battering and terrorism?
Actually not, and I'll tell you why. It's because, and if you look at the emails, it's the kind of names and put downs and the length of time that they go on. It's that kind of thing. You don't fit into high conflict. High conflict suggests a balance of power, and they might say things to each other, and they might not be respectful. But this goes way beyond that when you look at what's said in these instant messages and text. It's absolutely, to me, abhorrent, and would be considered absolutely psychological verbal abuse in a battering kind of range and not in an abusive kind of range. It goes past that.
How does it affect your assessment when you do not have the whole story from both individuals?
Oftentimes, and particularly when you're working on a murder case, you don't have the story. And by the way, for the most part, an expert...
No response. What affects it?
She's still answering.
Overall, you may continue.
For the most part, an expert witness doesn't have access to the other side of the equation, but in a homicide, you definitely don't. So what you try to gather is all the information that you can, and all that's provided for you, and all that you think you need to make an assessment. So what I do is I try to get as much from the other person who's not present as I can, and I have a big box of materials at home that I have been reading through and have read through over the last year and a half. So my goal, whether it's a child custody case, whether it's a family law or a criminal case, is to get as much information as I can from both sides, because I don't want to be biased. I don't want to be just seeing one person's point of view, and so I have tried to get information to see both points of view as well.
In your opinion, is it possible that Jodi could have also been a perpetrator in her relationship with Travis?
I don't see any evidence of that. I just don't see any evidence of it. In the materials that I have access to, there is no evidence of that.
Is it possible Jodi could be guilty of psychological abuse toward Travis, given that we are not privy to the majority of their conversations?
As I said, I think anything's possible. I just don't have any evidence of it. And part of what I looked at is her prior two relationships, because when you look at longer term relationships and the one she had with Mr. Alexander, they should be able to give you information about that kind of thing happening. And neither Mr. Brewer, who was with her for 4 years, nor Mr. McCartney, who was with her for 2, indicated in any way that she was abusive or jealous or controlling or manipulative, and in fact remained friends with her after they broke up, which is usually a good sign that they had some positive feelings for her.
Could any of Travis's actions be considered defensive rather than abusive?
Any of us can get angry, any of us can get upset, any of us can get defensive. When I look at the kind of tirades, that is beyond defensive. That is beyond defensive. That is tearing somebody's character apart, and that is not a defensive way of handling things. And it goes on way too long for it to be just a defensive way of handling things. I mean, there are some emails where he's just angry, but he tends to take it to a little bit of an extreme, even at lower levels. And then when he escalates, it's pretty darn extreme.
Can two children facing identical abuse situations end up handling those situations very differently as they become adults? Can you explain how and why?
Sure. When you grow up in the family that you grow up in, it's not just what's dealt to you, it's the way that you see what's dealt to you. And anybody who has children or grows up with siblings knows that all of your siblings can see things differently. So, for instance, if you have an accessible adult that you can really count on, like you have a friend's parent or an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent that is there for you on a regular basis, that can change. Your personality, the way you take things in, if you blame yourself or if you blame the parent or if you're able to see clear of that situation. If there's a community that's set up where you have, maybe you're in a scouting troop, or maybe you go to a church, or maybe you are part of a softball team or baseball team, somewhere where you get positive things, that can have an impact. But generally, most kids, their brain development is exponential from 0 to 6. So most kids learn a lot about who they are between 0 and 6. Not that we don't keep learning, but your disposition, how you come out, your personality affects how you take things in. So there's a lot of things that can make a difference. The problem is when you learn a lot of negative things in your family of origin, if you're neglected, if you're without food, if your parents are violent with each other, that generally speaking, you're going to need some intervention to just help you in intimate relationships because you don't learn what you don't see and you don't have exposure to. Even if you're a strong personality.
You talked about great differences in the stories of victims versus perpetrators. Does it concern you at all that you can't get a full and complete story from Travis?
Yes, I wish I could get a complete story from Travis. And I can't. I can only take what I got from his friends and from women that he was involved with and from his own writing about his childhood, his own writing in his journals. I don't think I got a complete story. I got as complete a story as I could get, and I tried to get as complete a story as I could get.
If a person starts out a relationship with low self-esteem and does things he or she does not necessarily like or want to do, is their partner considered abusive if those dislikes are never verbalized or shared?
If a person doesn't verbalize, of course, nobody's a mind reader. You can't expect people to know what you don't tell them. But I think the difference is if you are not abusive, you still don't act abusively. And it wouldn't take much to know that being called a
With a question, talks about them verbal.
Sustained. We're going to move on to the next question. How quickly can abuse escalate from the first time two people meet?
It's very different. Usually, what I hear is that there's a period of time where that's not happening because most people don't get in relationships if they think somebody's going to be abusive with them. But it varies. I mean, everybody's different, and so you can see different patterns. But once you begin to see an escalation, there tends to be an ongoing escalation, and it can be like this. It doesn't have to be a straight line up at all, but usually over time what you begin to see is an escalating pattern.
Prior to Lisa Andrews and Jodi Arias, do you know who Travis Alexander's girlfriend was?
A woman by the name of Deanna.
Can you describe some details of that relationship to the best of your knowledge?
I believe that they were together on and off for 7 years. She went on a mission, so she was gone for 2 years. According to Miss Arias, he didn't really want her to go. He wanted her to stay, and she went away, and they wrote letters to each other during that time. He seemed to still really care about her. They didn't, I know they continued to have a relationship of some sort. I know that he said that he considered that he took the best 7 years of her life and that it was going to be hard for her to find a partner that she deserved. And I don't really know what that meant. I know she loaned him money for a business that he started and that she asked for the money back. I don't know if she got it back, but they still seem to have a friendly relationship. But that's about all I know there.
A lot of your testimony has been based on what Jodi has told you. It has been proven that Jodi has lied multiple times since killing Travis. How are you able to know everything she is saying is truthful?
I'm not basing a lot of what I know on...
About lying.
It is responsive to the question, Judge.
Let me read the question. How are you able to know everything she is saying is truthful? How are you able to know everything she is saying is truthful?
Wasn't the first part that I based it on what she said, and I was trying to address that I didn't just base it on what she said.
All right, you may continue.
Okay, I based it on...
Judge, beyond the question, yes. How can she, if she based it?
She's basing it on the question, the entire question that was asked.
All right, overruled, you may answer.
Okay, I didn't just base it on what Jodi told me. I based it on everything that I read and everything that, all of the materials I've read from numerous sources. But how do I know everything she told me was true? I don't know everything she told me was true. I know that I have enough backup with the information that I got that was collateral to what Ms. Arias said to believe that she is telling me the truth about most things. And once again, that she lied after the killing of Mr. Alexander does not make her a liar. It makes her a frightened human being, like most human beings who have done something that is abhorrent to them and they have a hard time facing. So I don't think that makes her a liar. I don't get that her character prior to this event, I don't get information that says Jodi Arias is a liar from anybody.
Did you ever see any proof that Travis physically abused Jodi?
The only thing I saw was a broken finger.
Judge, lack of foundation.
Overruled.
That's what I saw, that she had a broken finger.
Isn't it possible that Jodi did not write some of those incidents in her journal because they never happened?
It's possible, although Mr. Alexander didn't write in his journal about things that he said happened either.
Sustained. According to the conflict scale, would Jodi be put in the aggressive group if she slapped and kicked her mother?
The conflict tactic scale is actually about adult relationships, so it's never been standardized or the questions were not asked to teenagers. So I can't tell you because it's an adult scale. It's looking at people in adult relationships, and that's what conflict tactic scale is about.
Have any of your patients ever killed their partner?
Yes.
Are you able to confirm whether or not Jodi abused Travis? Would you say it was a possibility?
I just don't have any evidence of it. There's nothing I look at in her history with the other men in her life, or in any of the exchanges between the two of them that would indicate to me that, that she had. I mean, there's possibilities of everything, but I don't see evidence that supports that.
Would you classify Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias' relationship as a love-hate relationship?
I would classify it as an abusive relationship.
How does a love-hate relationship impact the parties over time?
Love-hate relationships, I actually, if you were looking at my continuum, I'd see them as more high conflict. They're people that stay together, they're disrespectful to each other, they don't have a way, they don't solve problems well. So over time, they erode the friendship that they have with each other. Sometimes they come into counseling, 15 years down the road, and they really don't like each other, and they want you to perform a miracle with them. But they've stopped caring about each other. They've stopped seeing each other as friends. They see each other as enemies. But there is basically a balance of power in that relationship, and it tends to go back and forth between both people. So that's how I see that as different than an abusive relationship.
The violence level of Jodi's response to neutralize what she perceived as a threat was extreme and way beyond neutralizing the threat. In your experience, is this response consistent with what a victim of abuse would do?
My experience with females, in particular females who are victims, is that when they are afraid for their lives, they would not know when to stop. They would not know when it was enough. And actually, if you look at people who are trained in combat, like the...
Overruled, you may continue.
When you look at people who are trained in combat, like police officers or military, oftentimes when they're trained for combat and non-combat situations. And when they get in combat situations, they often go over the top, which is like excessive force or whatever. I think what's difficult is for anybody to know when to stop, when they'd be safe. And I actually, I think about that in movies. When you look at movies and you...
Sustained. Other than Jodi's word, what evidence do you have that Jodi ever received Spider-Man underwear or the pink t-shirt from Travis?
The Spider-Man underwear was part of a conversation that they had in an IM when she was traveling, and she was having an instant message with Mr. Alexander, and she told him that she would bring the Spider-Man underwear, and they were talking about that. So that's the evidence I have with that.
Has Jodi continued to write in her journal after June 4, 2008?
I haven't seen her journals after June 4, 2008. So I don't know.
Can you please provide the time frame in which you evaluated Jodi?
Just Jodi? I'm not sure if you mean Jodi or the whole case.
It says just Jodi.
I spent about 44 hours in jail with Jodi, face to face.
And time frame in terms of dates?
Oh, okay. The first visit was in October of 2011. And I spent 2 days that visit. There was another visit I think within 3 or 4, I can't tell you exactly, that I spent another 2 days. And then I came out early before my daughter's wedding and spent a part of a day with Jodi. So it was over, I believe, 4 different visits. There were 4 different visits or 5 different visits, and I'm not exactly sure. I don't have my calendar with me. And each visit was either the first time it was 8 hours and like 6 or 7 hours, and the next time was a couple of 6 or 7 hour days, I believe. There was one time that was like 3 or 4 hours. So it was spread out a little bit.
Regarding the argument in the car between Jodi and Travis in March of 2008, you stated that Travis slapped her across the face, quote unquote. Is that exactly what Jodi told you?
No, it isn't exactly what she told me. I think it was on the jaw, but I think about that as the face. So I said slapped across the face. What was most important to me is the slap.
Sustained. Please state how confident you are that Jodi did not lie to you.
That Jodi did not lie to me about what?
Did not lie to you.
Like ever? I don't believe she lied to me about significant things. I don't have reason to believe she lied to me. I don't have evidence that supports she lied to me. Is it possible she lied to me about some things? It's possible. But when I'm looking at the issue of abuse...
It is not beyond the scope.
Overruled. You may continue.
What I came in to do was really to look at the issues of domestic violence. And when I look at the issues of domestic violence, and not this little detail or that little detail, but I'm looking at the issue of domestic violence, I found compelling evidence for domestic violence, or I would not be here.
Sustained. You described a vague connection between Mr. Alexander's childhood and his behavior. Can you describe this connection for us?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's vague at all. The most significant factor with people who are abusive in their adult relationships is they're growing up in abusive relationships. Now, a lot of people have grown up in abusive relationships, and it's kind of a matter of degree. But the worst kind of childhood abuse is usually associated with the most difficulty in having a successful intimate relationship and a non-abusive intimate relationship. And Mr. Alexander's childhood is incredibly abusive. There are situations where his father kicked the door down with him on the other side of it. He was thrown across the room. He talked about being beaten by his mother. He talked about not having food to eat. He talked about living in a camper shell. He talked about his mother being sleeping off a meth high for days and his father being gone. He talked about his father and his mother being abusive with each other. He talked about the neglect of finding a piece of moldy bread to eat, and he ate it, about being afraid to wait because...
Connection.
Sustained.
The connection is that when you are submitted and exposed to that kind of violence, you learn about survival. And in fact, it's often called, by Bruce Perry, called chronic combat readiness, that a child who grows up in that kind of situation can see threat in things that other people don't see threat in, can be hypervigilant, can be in a survival mode. And part of that survival mode is the world as it affects me. So you have to look out for yourself in that kind of situation. So there's a direct link between what you're exposed to and how you handle it, especially if there is no intervention, nobody to help you learn to handle it any differently.
In the April 2008 incident, you stated Jodi did not fight back because she did not want to hurt Travis. Are you saying she would rather lay there and possibly die than fight back?
Unless somebody believes that they're going to be hurt, or there are a lot of people who don't fight back. Either they're afraid they're really...
Other people, that's specifically in this circumstance, not responsive.
Sustained. Are you saying that Jodi would rather lay there and possibly die rather than fight back?
I don't know what she was thinking. She said she didn't want to hurt him, and she knew she would have to hurt him.
Just because a person may appear to be controlling, does that automatically mean they are physically abusive?
No, it doesn't. You can have somebody who's controlling and never lays a hand on anybody, but they manipulate and psychologically control.
Actually, understood.
Sustained. Are you aware if any of Travis's ex-girlfriends besides Jodi have said Travis was physically abusive toward them?
There are no ex-girlfriends that I've read who say that Travis has been physically abusive to them.
Is it possible that the instant message between Jodi and Travis on May 10, 2008 regarding his temper was a running joke between the two of them?
It certainly didn't sound like it.
In the May 26, 2008 text messages and instant messages between Travis and Jodi, if Jodi was that upset with what Travis was saying to her, why didn't she stop talking to him right then?
Well, I don't know, except that
Objection, foundation, it doesn't know.
Well, she was going to explain what she did know.
You can follow up with that. Sustained. Other than Jodi, did you interview anyone else face to face?
no, I did not.
Are you aware that Jodi's grandparents' house was broken into on May 28, 2008, only 2 days after the fight they had through instant messages and text messages?
Yes, I'm aware that the grandparents' house was broken into.
We have heard of different females Travis talked to between December 2007 through May of 2008. Wasn't it a known fact between Jodi and Travis that he was trying to find someone he could marry?
It was a known fact that he was trying to find someone to marry. I just, the conversations,
Answer.
Can you finish your response?
the conversations would not lead you to believe that these were trying to woo somebody or court somebody to find out if they could marry them. They were very flirtatious from the beginning, sexual from the beginning.
You stated, one person has more power than the other person. Can that be because the other person gives it rather than because the one person commands it?
Yes, it can. What I find, though, is that if you're not in a...
Overruled.
that you don't have to be abusive because somebody gives you power. Because somebody is less able to take power than the other person doesn't mean the other person has to be abusive. And frankly, if you're in a relationship that
Sustained. Have any of the women with whom Travis had a relationship, other than Jodi, stated that Travis abused them psychologically, verbally, or physically?
Lisa Andrews talked about him sort of putting her down, not respecting her values, saying that if she wanted to be a teacher, she'd probably be a good teacher, but it would suck if that's what she chose to do with her life. So there were women, there was another woman who complained that he said nobody would ever...
Who are you referring to?
Nicole, who said that
There's lack of foundation in the relationship between the two.
Judge, it's not necessary for her to discuss her answer.
Overruled. You may continue.
who said that Mr. Alexander,
Overruled.
told her that no one would ever want to date her because she was like her boyfriend, that she was like the man that she ended up being with. And what seems important to me here is that these are not long relationships.
Sustained. Amid all of the interviews with family and friends of either Travis or Jodi, did anyone mention either concern or suspicion of abuse regarding Travis or Jodi?
Matt McCartney mentioned that he believed that Jodi had confided in him and that he knew there was verbal abuse by talking to Jodi and that he suspected that there was physical abuse, but he didn't know.
You have used the term survivor several times during your testimony. Could you please define this term?
We used to use the term victim with domestic violence, and what people have started using is the term survivor because it has a more positive sound, and because people do survive these relationships, and it's a more powerful word than victim.
Could a survivor also be a perpetrator?
Yes, a survivor could be a perpetrator, but for the most part, and when I was answering that question before, there's a thing called violent resistance, where someone who is basically the victim of domestic violence lashes out. There's also a term that has been coined and is used in California, and I'm not sure if it's used here, called dominant aggressor, which is what the police department tries to look at, and that's to determine who actually is the primary offender in this relationship, who is the person with the most power in the relationship.
You stated there was nothing in Jodi's journals, emails, etc., indicating she was jealous. Wouldn't that be consistent with her belief in the law of attractions?
It could be, although she did list things about her being very depressed, about her being a shell of her former self. So although for the most part in her journal, she didn't try to list negative things came out in her journal. Negative things, some non-specific kind of negative things about Mr. Alexander being cruel or...
Sustained. Could a female abuse, batter, or terrorize a man to the point of killing him?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
Could a female abuse, batter, or terrorize a man to the point of killing him?
Yes, women can be perpetrators. The percentage...
Still,
Overruled. You may continue.
When you look at something like the continuum, or you're looking at high-end battering, when you look at the National Surveys of Households and Families, which is a non-criminal justice survey, the Violence Against Women Act survey that includes 8,000 men and 8,000 women, the emergency room surveys, the FBI Unified Crime Reports, you still see overwhelmingly in violent crimes where there's...
And sustained. We keep hearing him and perpetrator in conjunction with one another, but couldn't a perpetrator be a she?
A perpetrator can be a she.
How many times did you meet with Jodi and on what dates?
Well, I tried to answer that before, and I can't tell you the dates without my calendar. Except for the first date was, I think it was October of 2011. There was, I know, a time in August because that's when my daughter got married. And there were 2 other times. In fact, I think when Mr. Martinez interviewed me, I met with her then. That was in November. but I'm not certain of all the dates. I would have to have my calendar.
During your testimony, you concurred that many things actually happened, such as when Travis was supposedly caught with photos of young boys. Aren't you in fact only basing this on what Jodi told you?
I'm basing, yes, I am basing that on what Ms. Arias told me, and on those emails, or on the sex tape when he talks about corking the pot of a young.
Lack of foundation as to how she knows this instance.
She's still answering the question, what supports her belief?
Overruled. You may follow up with that.
Corking the pot.
I'm sorry. Stating the objection. I'm going to
I'm
allow
sorry.
your attorney to follow up.
Okay.
You claim that Jodi not getting medical attention for her finger or other injuries caused by Travis is consistent with other battered women because they do not want to ruin the perpetrator's reputation or get them in trouble. What would prevent the battered person from getting medical attention and simply lying about the cause?
There are people who get medical attention and lie about the cause. If there's any suspicion and the doctor interviews, you can wind up sort of being stuck.
Overruled. You may continue.
So there are people who go to the doctor and make a report and lie. There are people who do that. I think that in this particular incident.
Sustained. You claim Travis's name-calling turned into character assassination, but my understanding is that in order for character assassination to occur, it would have to include diminishing someone's character to other people. If the name-calling was only between Travis and Jodi, wouldn't this just be considered more severe or intense name-calling and not character assassination?
No, character assassination does not have to occur in the presence of other people, and most of the time it doesn't. Tearing apart somebody's character, particularly if you're spending most of your time together, you don't have another mirror of reality to look at. So if somebody's tearing apart your character, somebody's tearing apart who you are, and you love that person, they have the power to tear apart your character. Most character assassination does not happen in front of other people.
You testified that in completing a couple assessment, you talked to both parties to confirm and validate your concerns. In this case, you were only able to talk with one person. How do you validate the information presented to you is truthful in order to base an accurate decision?
By using collaborative data and looking at different things. I'm not sure if it was Mr. Alexander's blog, but there was some, I don't know, Facebook from blog, but they asked him what he liked. He said, "I don't like whores."
Sustained. You testified that in March, when Jodi's phone voicemail box was full, Travis ordered Jodi to empty it. How do you know that he ordered her or just asked her?
Well, he said empty it out as opposed to please or whatever. So there's an implied you empty it out there. That's how I read it.
Considering Travis and Jodi communicated frequently, wouldn't you say it is reasonable that Travis might get a bit irritated that he could not leave a message with Jodi for a week because her voicemail was full?
Sure, he could get irritated. It's not a matter of being irritated. It's a matter of what you do.
Overruled. You may continue.
It's a matter of what you do when you're irritated. It's a matter of how far you go when you're irritated. I mean, any of us get irritated. We get irritated at people we love and care about all the time. But it's sort of like, now how do I handle that? What's the pattern that I use to handle it? And anybody can get irritated. Anybody can get over the top a little bit, but it's just so far over the top. That's my concern.
Since you were hired for this case to look into Travis and Jodi's relationship to determine whether or not this was an abusive relationship, Why would you not look further into Travis's text about him fearing Jodi? Do you feel this may have been important?
I continued to read the text to this particular person and to read the texts that were occurring at that time. And I didn't see anything else that would lead me to believe he was afraid, including his behavior. So when I look at the information, I also look at what surrounds the information. So I was reading text he had written to other people at the same time, and his behavior toward Miss Arias. And as I said before, stalkers do not...
Sustained. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a 10-minute recess, but please limit it to 10 minutes. Please remember the admonition. You are excused. Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. You have many years of experience dealing with abusive men. Is that correct?
Yes.
If so, wouldn't by far the majority of men you have known throughout your career be abusive?
Actually, I have lots of male friends and my own family members and my son. So I've got lots of male people in my life that aren't abusive, including a co-facilitator that I've worked with for over 20 years in West LA, and a co-facilitator that I started with in 1980 that we work very closely together for 28 years, and he just retired. And I've worked with a range of men. Some of them are anger management, and I've also have men in my private practice where domestic violence isn't an issue at all. I have a broad-based private practice. So I work with people on a variety of issues.
Is it possible your view of men in general is skewed or biased toward being abusive?
I don't think so. I get a great dad. He was here yesterday. I've got a great brother. I've got a great son. I've got great brother-in-laws. I have some very, I think, very significant men in my life, male friends, people I've worked with in the probation department, people I've worked with in criminal justice, people I've worked with doing training. I've got lots of male friends, so I would have to say probably I wouldn't be able to work.
Objection, you have a scope. She's skewed.
Overruled. You may complete your statement.
I don't think I would be able to work with people who are violent, and that includes some women as well. I don't think I'd be able to do that if I didn't have a good balance in my own life of people who are positive role models and mentors in my own life.
Did you read all of Jodi's and Travis's journals during the time they were in their relationship, or just the portions provided to you?
I only received the portions of anything. All I got was what was provided to me. I didn't know if that was all that was available or not, but what I had was provided to me.
Do you believe it is possible that Travis said some of the negative things he said to Jodi because he was afraid of her stalking him and he wanted to distance himself from her?
No. No, I don't believe that.
In your opinion, did Travis ever sound angry in his journals?
No, I don't believe he sounded angry in his journals.
Did Travis speak negatively of any of the women he was seeing in his journals?
In his journals?
In his journals.
Not in the journals that I read, no.
In the magazine subscriptions you had sent to Jodi in jail, she wrote hidden messages in them intended for someone. Were those messages for you?
I had no idea she wrote hidden messages to anyone, and I certainly didn't receive any.
If the defendant feels she has a high IQ, is it possible she would try to outsmart psychological tests?
It didn't appear that she's outsmarted them, if that was her intent.
Not responsive. She's asked, is it possible, not whether or not she did.
She should be allowed to explain her answer.
Overruled. Answer the question.
It didn't appear in reading what either report wrote that if she intended to, that she did. So I don't see that if she did try, she wasn't successful, and I don't know whether she would have tried or not. It didn't appear to me that she tried to outsmart me, but, you know.
Jodi's old friend stated she was manipulative and liked to play the victim. Even though it was high school, is it possible that those traits stayed with Jodi as she got older?
Two things, a correction. Her friend was from elementary school, not from high school.
Judge, this characterizes manipulative. That was on June 13th of 2008.
Let me
Characterizes
reread
that.
the question. I'm going to reread the question.
Okay.
Jodi's old friend stated she was manipulative and liked to play the victim. Even though it was high school, isn't it possible those traits stayed with her as she got older?
I don't have evidence of that. I don't have evidence of that from...
Objection, non-responsive to the question.
Is it possible
If possible.
those traits stayed with Jodi as she got older?
Anything's possible. I don't have evidence of that.
Have you seen any proof that Jodi was physically abused by Travis other than her finger that she claims Travis broke?
No, I haven't.
Is there any reason we should believe that Jodi has not manipulated you as she has others?
I'm not sure who you believe she's manipulated.
Objection, you haven't spoken to the question.
Sustained.
I think can we approach?
Yes. Is there any reason we should believe that Jodi has not manipulated you as she has others?
I didn't use Jodi as my evidence. I used so many other things to look at.
Objection, non-responsive to the question.
Overruled.
So I don't believe that Jodi manipulated me because the areas I looked at were corroborated by other people. So, I mean, it's possible. I also don't have any evidence that she's been manipulating people. So I'm not sure where that actually came from. She's not been described as manipulative by others.
Sustained. Why have you looked at Miss Arias multiple times during the cross-examination with the prosecutor when there were breaks and sidebars to meet eyes with Jodi and give her a small, warm smile?
I have done that on occasion, just to acknowledge her, but no other reason. I've given maybe.
Overruled.
I maybe given warm. I have friends that have been coming friends of mine from elementary school, and I look in a direction, and it doesn't necessarily mean I'm looking at Miss Arias. I know I've looked at her a couple times, but I've actually tried to avoid looking at Miss Arias. And I have looked at my friends who've been in the front row, and Maria there, and whatever, and I've smiled at them. But I haven't spent a lot of time looking at Miss Arias and smiling at her.
Do you have personal feelings for Jodi or feel sorry for her?
I have feelings. I have liked Jodi in terms of working with her and in terms of having a cooperative relationship with her. But I mean, we haven't had a relationship other than the 44 hours that I've spent in jail with her. So we don't have a friendship. We don't have a relationship other than that. And I've had that relationship with other people that I have worked with who have been in jail as well. I'm pretty clear on my own boundaries, so I don't think that's been a problem. And I absolutely, if I thought that would get in my way, in the same way I do with my clients, if something personal would get in my way of having an effective relationship, I would step away from it.
On April 9th at approximately 11:33 a.m., when discussing Jodi being manipulative at the Purple Plum and what the witness said about Jodi, what the waitress said about Jodi, when the prosecutor was marking the exhibit, you looked at Jodi, gave a half smile, and shrugged your shoulders. Why do you keep doing this?
Wow, I didn't even know I was doing it. Truthfully, I do shrug my shoulders, I do, but I don't even remember doing that. I mean, I don't even know what to say to that question.
Considering the lies Jodi told after killing Travis, why would you believe the things she told you happened before the killing?
I believe those things because of the corroborative data, not because of what Jodi told me or didn't tell me. I've got data that corroborates many of the things that she said in terms of what happened. I don't have data, as I said. I don't have any, I wasn't there during any of the physical incidents. But because much of what was said was corroborated by other sources, I believe those things that are corroborated, and they paint a picture.
Hypothetically, if you were to discover that Jodi had actually exaggerated rather than understated the physical abuse events that she told you about, do you think it is possible that you would need to revise your opinion on the degree or severity of the abuse within the relationship? Please explain.
I would certainly re-look at things because that would be important. But I also am really looking at the kind of rage and escalation that happens with Mr. Alexander in this very intimate relationship, and sort of the leading up to different things in relationships that are very, very much less intimate than the ones he's had with, than the ones with other women. And I also look at the degree of abuse in his childhood. I look at the fact that he writes, I don't like whores.
Overruled. You may continue. You may continue.
Okay. So it's not just looking at what Jodi says. It's looking at what Mr. Alexander says. It's looking at Mr. Alexander's behavior. I don't think somebody has to be perfect to be a battered woman or to be a victim of abuse. I think we can not like some of the things about that person. I think we cannot like their attitude or how they appear to us or the way we judge them. I certainly don't like every victim of abuse I've ever worked with, but it doesn't mean they weren't victims of abuse. And for me, that's what I want to look at, not what I personally feel about somebody, but do I believe this really happened to them?
In a verbal discussion, often facial expressions and body language can be seen, and tone or inflection can be heard. Additionally, in an interview, clarifying statements can be made and clarifying questions asked. Do you agree?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
In a verbal discussion, often facial expressions and body language can be seen, and tone or inflection can be heard. Additionally, in an interview, clarifying statements can be made and clarifying questions asked. Do you agree?
Yes.
When assessing this case, to which did you give more weight, written or verbal communications?
Well, I had more written information. So I gave more weight to the written information than I had. In terms of the physical interaction, that would be with Jodi Arias, and that was in jail, sometimes behind a screen where you really couldn't see. I mean, you started looking cross-eyed after a while, so for me, I couldn't even always see clearly. So that, I could go with inflection and tone and that sort of thing, but it was a very uncomfortable kind of environment to spend that many hours in. So I actually, because I had so much more written information, I relied more on the written information.
Do you feel that being unable to interview Travis Alexander gives Jodi Arias an unfair advantage in telling their shared story of abuse?
I wish I could have interviewed Travis Alexander. As I said, I got the information, and I think part of the information that was really important to me at the beginning was from his close friends. And so I got information about him and the way people saw him, and then once again in his own words in his childhood, and then in his own interactions with Jodi Arias and with other women. So I feel like I got a picture of Mr. Alexander.
Are you aware of phone conversations that were made either before, during, or after various series of texts, instant messages, emails that you reviewed?
I am aware that there were phone calls, and I get confused about sometimes which is which. I know there were phone calls, and I'm not sure if those were recorded. I know the phone sex tape was recorded, but beyond that, I don't know if there were recorded messages that I had, or if they were all IMs, texts, and Gmails.
Did you ask Jodi if phone calls were ever part of those exchanges?
Yeah, I think there were follow-up phone calls, or there were phone calls that were made, but I don't have dates on those, that kind of thing.
Of the 18 forensic cases, how many were cases where a male was the victim of abuse and not a perpetrator?
Of the forensic cases that I've done, There was a case where there was,
Unresponsible.
Sustained. Can you give us numbers?
there were at least two, but I'm not sure. There were at least two. And there was one where the father killed his son-in-law, and the father who did the killing was also a victim.
Sustained. You testified that when conducting a couple assessment, family of origin of both parties is pursued.
Yes.
You pursued family of origin for Travis in assessing him as a perpetrator. However, why did you not assess Jodi's family of origin, considering Jodi as a possible perpetrator of abuse rather than as a victim?
I did assess Jodi's family for abuse. Her level of abuse was lower, much lower than Mr. Alexander's, but oftentimes what we see is that women and men do same-sex role modeling. And so oftentimes the women wind up being victims as opposed to perpetrators. But I didn't rule that out. And I thought Jodi had a fairly dysfunctional family. I thought that on the scale of things that Mr. Alexander's family was far more violent and in far more reaching ways and different kinds of abuse.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take the evening recess at this time. Please be back tomorrow morning. We will start at 9:30. Have a nice evening. Please remember the admonition.